I would say that if one has even slight connotation prior to Iboga regarding the mindfulness practices and meditation, it makes a world of difference. It really does, and it just really comes all together, because the practices of the ancient yogis and Buddhists are all about sitting in this deep space of nothingness, which is nothing at all. It is actually the field of all potential and possibility, and that is the space within which one sees that everything you ever need is here within oneself, because you are Buddha nature. You are awakened being already. So it's the quality, once again, of the absolute seeing of oneself, and no screwing around, so to speak, no stones unturned. It is deep inquiry work with oneself, and oneself has all the answers. Because if it's coming from pure perception and not coming from belief systems and ideas and even organized religions, then it's just this pure perception sees all to be well, fundamentally. There is always the recognition of the internal reference now, looking into everything. So look at what is looking, really, is what's happening. So the realization happens that it's always been here. So it's not like anything changes and it goes into the forefront and all that. Then you realize that it's always, the awareness always is. There's no independent nature to anything. So the awareness always is, as is, here. And then this awareness is now looking into everything. Rather than for most people, when they're not awake to the presence that they are, it seems all the references are from outside stimulants coming in. But once you have this, as we say, awareness is aware of itself, then there is always the ground of your being, the ground of substratum of all things, is the reference that is always here, and through which one sees. And within which thoughts arise and subside, emotions arise and subside, other people's dances happen, and sometimes there is rather this deepest feeling of there is no separation between this outside and this in here, although there's different personalities and different expressions of the one, but at first it may be that you don't see the separation, but little by little by little bit, the more with practice and the more with seeing, the fun begins, where now this is also the individual expression of the one, and it is it still has its preferences. It still loves the chocolate ice cream rather than vanilla. It still likes the hot tea, which I will talk about myself in a particular way, but it's not attached to if that's not there. Yet the personality, sort of the way that it expresses itself, is still there, and all of those things are still there, loving the colors and beautifying in the way that you want to, but it isn't so much of a idea of without that. It's not defining you anymore, let's say. I feel that now that I have become more and more interested in and actually combining awareness and mindful practices and Iboga with each other and meditation practices with Iboga, I'm seeing more and more how extremely imperative that becomes, and that the more we can emphasize the aftercare and the integration. I think I've talked about it in our previous questions that this is where the work begins, actually. So it's Barry had expressed to me one time, and I just thought, oh, what a beautiful way of saying it. He'd said that he'd read somewhere that Iboga is the window but not the way. And so I can't emphasize that more, actually, because what I really feel the window is the opportunity to really see into the truth of how it really is, rather than the fog of the mind or the conditioned mind or the ideas of oneself and the ideas of others, or that as external things are going to, although may be temporary fixes, are going to make us happy or joyous or escape or yeah. So because Iboga, it can show you the opportunity into all of, for many, not all things possibly, but many things where the working of the mind and how our egoic perceptions or our survival dependent nature, it can possibly create a lot of stories and trauma and things like that that may not be true, but then they get embedded in us and they feel really real, and they actually are being experienced in our body, because when we can see that in Iboga, and then we come out of Iboga, I feel that many people feel immediately very wide open and expansive, and they think, well, this is it. But in my experience with many that I've seen and also worked with, that is where the work begins. And I would say that there is 3 things to address that are very necessary. One, the emotional body, or the body of the past. I think that there is a teacher, a spiritual teacher named Eckhart Tolle. He called it the pain body, which sometimes is triggering. And even if something had happened many, many years ago, and if you have a slight connotation of something that way is appearing before you, and you trigger, because the body triggers thinking now it has to defend itself from that trauma, or that trauma, period, yeah. So the work is to actually begin to recognize the present moment, to be in the present. I feel that most addicts or people with addictions, that is greatly missing in them. When they do not know that they are absolutely okay in this moment, that no matter what's arising, the anxiety, the desire to drink, the desire to feel okay, the desire to release this tension, all those things, when they actually can practice sitting with that, being with that, going through that, and also being guided by the guide to go through that, they will actually see that the monster that they were so afraid of was not the monster at all. That it is simply energy in motion, emotion. And Latin word for emotion is immover, which is to move and out. So it's just simply wants to release itself or transform itself. And when there is intention of that and attention, you will see that that pain or that anxiety can actually move around in your body and then ultimately dissolve in that moment. And that gives the body a different reference point. So then the urge to go and pick up a drink would go away whether you drink it or not, or to do any substance or anything as such. but it is a practice, and it can be done, and I've seen it done, and it does rewire your system, and it does rewire your habits, and it does change the way that you view everything, because when you're doing what I just described, you come back absolutely in this moment. You're here seeing that I'm looking at that table across from me. You're not in the fog and the and drowned in the feeling and the psychosis of what's happening in the system. So that's a practice that is very, very important in coming back into the present moment. And the other one is, of course, the observation of the thoughts itself, and that believing in the thoughts is suffering. That's very, very important to see. That when we have those stressful, self-deficient stories of and the ideas of ourselves, which are embedded and imbued in our system, it happens that this is the body. Even though we are not our form, it somehow has embedded and imbued itself in here. So I'm unlovable. I'm not good enough. That sense of self that is so rooted in self-deficiency, lack, and then. But when that can be seen from that place of witness observer, you can call it, there's many names for it, it doesn't matter what we call it, but it's called spacious awareness, it's called consciousness itself, it's called intelligence, but an observer, witness consciousness. When it's being witnessed and again being seen as just a thought, which is not your thought, but the thought itself is appearing within and inside of who you really are. It's appearing and disappearing inside of who you are, meaning the observer is the true you, watching the thought arising and subsiding from where it came from, which is not separate from you, but yet you're not identified with the thought. You're not hooked on the thought, and you're not so interested in it that now it's being believed. And as soon as it's being believed, then it triggers the emotion. I'm not loved. Stress immediately. And so I'm going to go to a drink, or I'm going to do whatever it takes now to feel loved, to escape the this feeling of discomfort. So that training, that mindfulness training, that witness consciousness and awareness training is tremendously important. So one, to really feeling into the body and actually recognizing and knowing the nature of emotion is extremely important. The nature of the mind is extremely important. And then the third is to finally see if not this or not that, if you're not really your emotions and if you're not really your thoughts, then who are you? And to begin to then recognize the very attributes of oneself that are free of the triggers of the emotions and free of the thoughts that create the insubstantial thoughts that are really not real, they're not true. That's where the mystery began. And many may not want to delve into that, but I think that the first two would finally, naturally would want you to know this infinite space, this spaciousness, this serenity, this clarity that is always here, always already, but it must be, I hesitate to use this word, but it must be cultivated, because it's always already here, but cultivated meaning the mind has to turn around and look at itself. The emotion has to relax itself as it is. So recognizing what's really happening, and then how would I say it, to allow everything to be as it is. and then investigate. And investigate is not around like a lot of questioning, but investigating is this really me? This is arising, or it is just an energy, or it's just a thought. And then when that begins to dissolve before you, before the witness, before the awareness, then again there is a victory here. There's a clear seeing, clear reference point shift. That I was doing it by identifying with it, but what happens when I don't? Immediate peace, immediate center, immediate presence, immediate relaxation, and there is much freedom in that. Ancient yogis and tantrics, which I have studied for many years, very much believe that the physical body that carries the cellular memory and perceptions from the past, which is now triggered in the body, can very much be transformed and released by deep conscious breathing and breath work. And there's many practitioners out there, I'm one of them, that can guide people into breathing in such a way that they may be breathing for a long time, like sometimes 15-20 minutes, in the different sequences and different ways of breath work, that can actually bring their body into enormous discomfort at first, but then it begins to transform the energy. And I am talking from the perspective that you're not just your physical body, that you're also an energy body. And that energy, when it is allowed, and this type of breaths will, conscious breathing or conscious breath work will really do it, it brings up all the fear and all of the anxiety and all of the sadness or anger or whatever is suppressed in our systems. And then once you go through that, through breath work, you come into this space, which also gives you the reference into the wholeness and the true nature that you are. There's nothing more beautiful than to have a being who's not afraid of emotions, to really deeply feeling being, because once we start to totally feel and allow all emotions and experience all emotions to be okay within oneself, something incredible emerges. The heart begins to come back online because you're doing this with very deep kindness and compassion for self. So there's tremendous kindness and compassion for others, and the judgments within oneself for oneself relaxes, allowing things to be as they are, and it happens seemingly out, although there's no out or in, outside self as well. Knowing thyself, they say, is enlightenment. Knowing others is now wisdom. And so, and then there is this quote from Nisargadatta Maharaj, this non-dualist teacher, and I love it because he really emphasized the being, how important it is to be knowing your fundamental nature, and also the becoming, which is the expression that comes through the physical body and closing the gap. And he says that it is in the nature of the being to seek the becoming, and it is in the nature of becoming to seek the being. Between the two, my life flows, and so I am everything and I am nothing, and when I'm here, I am love. Yeah, so it's all about that. It's all about love. Love, to me, I rendered helpless, of course, just to describe love, because I can't. But I would say that love does not harm itself. Love is absolutely in allowing. The very nature of love is to allow itself. The very nature of love is to be in much clarity of when it is a no, it is a no. Yes, it is a yes. But there's always a yes even within the no. And it seemingly embraces everything, knowing that nothing is separate from you. Everything. And any time we ever reject anything in ourselves, it will come through as some sort of obstruction and destruction. So this work, this integrative work after seeing in Iboga, as we've talked about earlier, is imperative, I feel.